Persuadable. What's going on, boo-boos? We got Trappy Boy. I'm going to call him Trappy Boy going forward. So this is an actual footage of the adjustments. In order to get on the test server, it's got to be like 11, 12 o'clock at night. And I value my sleep too much. So there's a lot of footage out there. But I just want to talk about this update and what we can expect from it. This is more of an adjustment. So for those who don't know, Gamekeeper, he's going to be able to put traps down on the map. This is kind of like a weird version of Trapper from Dead by Daylight Mobile. And essentially, he can put 10 traps down on the map simultaneously. And if he puts any more down, then the first trap you put down disappears. It takes, I think, about 15 seconds for a survivor to free themselves. But if somebody else comes by, then they can, get that off of you faster. And of course, with the traps, you can dismantle them, which takes some time. And if you free yourself, I think Gamekeeper can see you for about 5 seconds. Now, it's cool that he's having traps, but this game is very different from Dead by Daylight, right? Dead by Daylight, there's a character called Trapper on there, and he's really not that good, but he can be good with the right add-ons. The difference, though, is that in Dead by Daylight Mobile, and this is an important discussion to have, in Dead by Daylight Mobile, the games are a lot longer. So as a Trapper, I can go around the map and put 1 or 2 traps down in one of the in the most popular looping areas. Whereas in Identity V, you're not really going to have the same luxury all the time. It's going to depend on your spawn point, and the reason being so is that the games are a lot faster. So you really can't set up traps throughout the entire game unless it's during an active kiting session. Now, another problem is that in Dead by Daylight Mobile, the environment is usually richer. It's a lot darker. It's harder to see things, so you can hide the traps better. There's even add-ons that allow you to hide the traps better. Whereas in Identity V, you're seeing this gameplay right now where the environment is not rich. You can see everything on the ground. So hiding traps, there will be a way to do it, but it'll be much more difficult. So I think really the main way that we're going to see Gamekeeper utilizing these traps is, they might try to put one down depending on where their first spawn point is. But really it's going to prevent the anti-looping. And before we say this is overpowered or underpowered, we need to remember that people will adapt, right? How you, kite one hunter might be a little bit different from how you kite another hunter. And that's a very important aspect. Such as Dream Witch, right? We know trying to tight kite a really, really good Dream Witch isn't as good as transitional kiting, but we know that for some hunters like Photographer, early game, tight kiting is the way to go with some transitional kiting. So there's different ways that we kite different hunters. And I think that Gamekeeper, this is really going to be a strategy where he's going to probably utilize this early game trying to prevent the tight kites and the looping, and it's going to depend on the map. Some maps have more tight kite and variability. I think one of the things to remember is on Moonlit, sometimes it can be difficult to transition from one area to another depending on where you're at. Whereas Red Church, you have a lot more, close quarters and you can keep moving. One of the things that we haven't talked about, by the way, you can't put a trap down within 12 meters of the rocket chair. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about, I don't think that's being talked about enough, is that with Trappy Boy, his hook is technically being adjusted. We see that the length of the hook is being adjusted, the grab area is going to be adjusted. So I think that's kind of a good and a bad thing. I think we've all been hit by a bullshit hook that shouldn't have fucking hit us, but it did because it auto-calibrated, right? So you don't have to be a sniper with Gamekeeper, right? Because the hook will automatically calibrate towards the survivor. And that was one of the good things about Gamekeeper, because one of the best ways of kiting him was the tight kiting. You really go around certain areas, it can be very difficult for him to hit his hook. But we also know that tight kiting, let's say on Lakeside, is going to be different than tight kiting on Moonlit, because a lot of his hook goes through Moonlit objectives. So the thing is that this is why it's considered an adjustment, borderline rework, because what we're going to see is that his hook is going to be faster, but it's not going to be as long, and it's not going to auto-calibrate, or that grab area isn't going to be as significant. He also has a third thing with Hatred, which slows somebody down by 20% when they vault over something, which is a good thing as well. That's actually really significant So I think we're getting so caught up on the rework with the traps and how he's going to use them and whether they're going to be good that we're forgetting the other adjustments that we must really discuss here. And so the question is how much is that grab area and calibration? What's it going to look like when it hits the actual game? Right now on the test server, I know there's videos out there that's showing it, but I really am wondering about the final project, what it's really going to look like. Now, we know certain survivors to a degree can counter this trap. Perfumer actually can't. She can't perfume and then go on a trap and then perfume back, from my understanding. I'm pretty sure a lot of the protection characters can absorb a trap hit. All right, like Seer's Owl will absorb a trap hit. Gardener, all of those characters who have protection points, they'll be able to go through this. But of course, it's going to take away their protection points. I think that's what's really needed in this game. I think it's important that Gamekeeper continues to get adjusted so he's going to be used more. I think that they're doing a good job at really taking away some of the powerfulness of the hook, but I think that trap is really going to be decent for close quarters. It's going to depend on the final result in regards to how long it takes to put the trap down. I think that's important. It's not unpopular, right? When you see somebody taking down a pallet, you start running away. It gives you a little bit of distance. So you got to ask yourself, is that what survivors are going to do with the trap? And really how he uses this trap early game is going to be very important. I think Gamekeeper is going to be very scary on some maps. You can counter a Gamekeeper relatively easy on a map like Red Church. But him putting traps down are going to make it a little bit more difficult. I think it's going to be a lot harder for lower and mid tiers. I think high tiers will find creative ways. But on a map like Moonlit, he's going to be a fucking monster. His hook goes through everything. That's not the same thing on Lakeside. So I think we got to look at Gamekeeper as one of those characters where he's getting a rework. The hook is being readjusted, okay? We see that he has that hatred trait. But with all characters, you don't always play every character on every map. Photographer mains know that. Photographer mains know which maps Photographer really excels at. It's not atypical for photographers, if they were to play competitively, they wouldn't play on Leo's memory and may not play on Lakeside, especially after the spawn calibration or spawn changes, right? But his ability to really shut off the tight kite is going to be very powerful on matches where maps where his hooks can really go through a lot of things. I think Gamekeeper is going to be very, very fucking scary on a map like Moonlit. I think that the sort of looping is going to force survivors to have to transition more, and that's where his hook is going to have to come into play. If you put down a trap and you shut off the loop, then you force them to transition to the next looping area. That's why the devs have decided to reduce the hook in terms of how far it goes in the auto calibration speed, so it should require a little bit more skill. But this really, his traps and high tiers are going to force survivors to have to transition more. And so that's where Gamekeepers are going to have to really get good at throwing their hooks, but it should also continue to auto-calibrate, and those hooks are going to be a hell of a lot faster. So this may be a decent rework. I think the best way to look at Gamekeeper is to look at which maps, again, he's going to excel at. I don't always like thinking some hunters are good on all maps, but some hunters are only really, really good on some maps. And that's kind of how Gamekeeper's always been. It's also going to be interesting to see what strategies you come up with, especially with Patroller. I know this probably isn't going to happen. Can you imagine like Patroller and someone going up and putting a trap on them? I mean, obviously they're not going to run into it. But you kind of hit them and force them to possibly run forward. You know what I mean? And then run right into your trap. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but that would be a very... I know some people with Gamekeeper, they were hypothesizing how if you put a trap down in front of you and then you hook them and hit them and then they land in the trap for a second hit. I think that's going to be hard to actually pull off, especially since the hook isn't going to go as far as what it used to. So you will have to get closer. But I think it's a decent adjustment. I think it makes him more versatile. One of the things people are talking about is how you can use the hooks. all like the whole match, and you know, later down the road somebody might run into the hooks. I think that's more theoretical. I think, again, that's more of a Trapper Dead by Daylight, where you're going around putting traps and hoping to get somebody. I don't think that method's going to work. I think that you put traps down based on the individual that you're trying to prevent the loop for, and then maybe, just maybe, you're in a popular area that somebody may run into later, but most likely won't. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you very much for watching. I love you, boo-boos, and bye-bye.